A man was accused of murdering his wife, but when he stood trial, the people sitting right behind him, defending him, were the mother and siblings of the woman who had died. This is one of the strangest cases you will ever hear. How could a man convince the victim's own family that he was innocent? And what truth had stayed hidden behind that perfect mask for nearly 5 years? If you watch this video till the end, you'll understand the darker side of human nature. You'll see how far a man respected by his entire community could manipulate the people around him. And you'll see how sometimes a single small detail at a scene is all it takes to unravel a perfect lie. It all began with an emergency call and a feeling that something was wrong from the very first moment. A seasoned detective calls emergency services, reporting that his wife has just shot herself. But the moment another investigator steps into the scene, he feels that something is very wrong. Westfield, Massachusetts, 1 in the afternoon, May 8th, 2018. State police arrive at an old farmhouse, 200 years old. In the dining room, a woman lies motionless. Her name is Amy Fanion, 51 years old, a single gunshot wound to the head. The man who reported it is her husband, Brian Fanion, but he's not an ordinary husband. He's a detective, and not a detective from somewhere far away, but the one in charge of crime scene at work for the very same Westfield Police Department. He tells his colleagues that during an argument, Amy grabbed his service weapon and took her own life. But what the investigators noticed next made them pause. On the dining table, in the middle of that scene, was one detail that didn't belong. A peanut butter and jelly sandwich, still intact on a plate. Amy had been making lunch for the two of them. This did not look like the scene of someone who had just decided to end their lives. People do not spread peanut butter on bread and then abandon everything the very next second. Sometimes, the first truth a scene reveals isn't in what's present, it's in what shouldn't be there. And the weapon was Brian's own service firearm. That raised a question no investigator wanted to ask about a fellow officer. What had really happened in that room? To answer that, we first have to go back to the woman who lay there, to the life she left behind, and who she truly was, before it all came apart. Amy Fanion was not just a name in the news or a body in a dining room. She was a person whom everyone who knew her described with the same word: light. Amy was born into a large family in Westfield. She and her sisters were known throughout the area as the prettiest, the smartest, and the kindest girls around. At 16, she met Brian Fanion, a young man 3 years older than her. The Fanions were a well-known family, with generations of police officers and politicians. In Westfield, people compared them to a kind of local dynasty. The two married and had 2 children together. Amy devoted her whole life to her family. But no one knew that behind that perfect family image, a crack was quietly widening. Amy's close friends said she loved being a mother more than anything. She believed being a parent was the best job in the whole world. She was deeply devout and kept a journal filled with words about faith, about light, about hope. Brian, too, was a model figure. A deacon at his church, a man who had gone on missionary trips building wells for people all the way in Mexico. From the outside, they were a devout, almost perfect couple. After 30 years of marriage, they were planning the next chapter of their lives: retirement. But the more perfect an image is, the more it sometimes needs to be protected at any cost, and that cost can be greater than anyone imagines. According to Brian, it was an argument over those very retirement plans that led to that fateful morning, and that is the version he was about to lay out in careful detail for the investigators. To get Brian's account on the record, investigators asked him to come in, and there at the police station, he sat down and recounted that morning. His story was very detailed, very smooth, and that was the problem. Brian said he left his office near noon and drove home to have lunch with his wife. They were continuing an argument left over from the night before. The argument, according to him, was about retirement. He didn't want to spend his remaining years maintaining the old house that Amy loved. They argued about the aging family dog, about a relative's play that Amy had committed him to attend, which irritated him. Then, according to Brian, things went down bad, very fast. He said he had placed his gun on the hutch in the dining room so he could use the bathroom. When he came out, he saw Amy already holding the gun in her hand, pointed at the side of her head. But what the investigators noticed was the way he told it. Brian said he was standing about 1.5 meters away and had lunged to try to stop her. He said he almost reached her in time. Then, according to him, the gun just exploded so quick. He described how all he could do was hold his wife's hands. A heartbreaking story, detailed down to the second. But sometimes, a story that is too perfect, too tidy, it exactly makes people suspicious. Because the truth is usually messy. It's only a lie that needs to be arranged so carefully. And at the end of the interview, when he was asked to hand over his personal phone, Brian said something strange. He said, "You're going to see some things on there, and it's not what it appears to be." For investigators, that was the first red flag. Brian himself had warned that his phone held some things, but what the investigators found was more than he admitted, far more. On Brian's phone were hundreds of deleted text messages. When recovered, they revealed a relationship he had been hiding with a woman named Corey. She was a volunteer. He'd met on a mission trip. At first, Brian called it just a friendship. He admitted to some flirting, but insisted it never went any further. But the messages told a different story. On May 7th, the very day before Amy died, Brian and Corey exchanged 72 text messages. That evening, he wrote to her, "Good night, my love. I hope you dream of the wonderful days and nights to come." But what the investigators found next was what truly ran cold. The next morning, around 10:30, Corey sent a message. "When can I hold you again?" Brian replied, "Not soon enough." Only an hour or two after that message, Amy Fanion was dead. Stop and think about that. While his wife was making lunch, the husband was texting flirtations to another woman. And only minutes later, that wife, gone. A lie rarely exists alone. It always needs other lies to shield it. And when that first layer cracks, the whole structure begins to collapse. Now the investigators had a motive. But a motive alone wasn't enough. They needed science. And science was about to speak in a way that could not be argued with. The affair gave Brian a reason. But reasons don't convict a person. For that, the investigators turned to the one witness that couldn't be charmed or fooled, the body itself. Brian was an expert in crime scene work. He knew exactly what the police would look for, but there was one thing even he could not stage. When a gun fires at a very close range, it doesn't just send out the bullet. It also expels tiny particles of gunpowder, leaving a distinct mark around the wound. Experts call it stippling. If Amy had really held the gun to her own head at close range, that mark would have been present on the wound. But what the forensic results showed changed the entire case. On Amy's wound, there was no gunshot residue, none at all. The experts concluded that the bullet had been fired from a distance of at least 45 centimeters, far beyond the reach of Amy's own arm. Physically, she could not have inflicted that wound on herself. In other words, someone had shot her from a distance. In the second interview, the investigators told Brian plainly that there was no gunshot residue on his wife. And for the first time, the normally calm, seasoned detective began to falter. He insisted the gun had been right there, right against her head, but the evidence said otherwise. People can lie. They can rearrange objects, delete messages, restage an entire crime scene. But there are laws of physics that never lie, and sometimes they are the last witness, speaking for the one who is gone. But even after science has spoken, a surprise was still waiting ahead, something that would stun even the prosecutor, and it came in the form of a letter. Now, normally, a victim's family are the first to demand justice, but in this case they did the exact opposite. As the investigation moved forward, a letter appeared in the case file. It didn't come from Brian or his lawyer. It came from Amy's own family. In that letter, Amy's siblings and even her own mother all affirmed one thing, that they were certain Amy had taken her own life, that they stood fully behind Brian. Now stop for a second and really think about that. The mother who had given birth to Amy, raised her, was now signing her name to a letter defending the very man suspected of killing her daughter. For the prosecutor, this was a situation almost without precedent. Your victim is gone, unable to speak for herself, and now the victim's own family has turned to stand with the accused. Why would that happen? The answer reveals the most frightening face of manipulation. A man skilled enough doesn't just hide his crime. He can make the very people who love the victim most believe in the version of the truth he has built. For Brian, years of being a devout husband in their eyes, a church deacon, a member of a respected family, that kind of trust does not shift easily. Their grief, in a way, had been turned by the very man who caused it into a shield for himself. But not everyone in the family was convinced. There was one person who had not signed that letter, a woman who would become the most important witness against Brian, and what she was about to reveal would change everything. While almost the entire family stood behind Brian, one of Amy's sisters chose the opposite path. She carried a secret, one that Brian himself had let slip. Her name was Anna, Amy's sister. She was the only family member willing to take the stand, to testify against her own brother-in-law. Anna said that during the investigation, Brian had anxiously confided in her about something he had searched for on his computer. He seemed uneasy about it. When Anna asked about what it was, Brian's answer made her blood run cold. He said he had searched the phrase, "how to make a murder look like a suicide." Brian quickly tried to explain. He said it was actually Amy who had asked him to look it up after the two of them watched a crime show on television. But Anna didn't believe it. She knew her sister very well, and she had never once seen Amy watch that kind of show. His explanation to her made no sense. Sometimes loyalty to the truth means standing up against the very people closest to you. It's a lonely and painful choice, but for someone who has gone, unable to defend herself, it can be the last hope. And Anna's testimony was only the beginning, because when investigators opened Brian's work computer, right there at the police station, they found an entire string of searches, and they painted a chilling picture of calculation. Brian thought he had wiped away all trace, but a computer never truly forgets, and what it recorded was more damning than any testimony. Cybercrime experts examined every one of Brian's devices, but it was the computer in his office, at the police station, that produced the strangest results. They noticed one thing. Ever since the relationship with Corey began, a series of suspicious searches had appeared. He looked up common household poisons, which drugs caused the most deaths each year, everyday household items that could kill. But what the investigators found next was colder than all of it. Only 11 days before Amy died, Brian had used his own work computer to watch a video. Its title was, "What Gunshot Residue Tests Tell Us." Think about what that means. He wasn't just looking up poisons or ways to hurt someone. He was studying the exact test he knew the police would run. The one piece of science that could expose him. Remember, it was gunshot residue, the very thing absent from Amy's body that proved she had been shot from a distance. And Brian, 11 days before his wife's death, had studied precisely that, all while he had not been assigned to any case that would require it. No one in the Westfield Police Department did gunshot residue testing. So why then was he learning how that test worked? There was only one answer that made sense. He wanted to know how to beat it. The very knowledge Brian used to stage his wife's death became the noose that convicted him. The most careful planner sometimes leaves behind the clearest trace, right where he thought it was safest. With all the evidence, the case went to trial, but the defense still had one last card to play, a scientific theory that could overturn everything. The forensics, the affair, the searches, Piece by piece, it had all led here, to a courtroom. And the prosecution believed Amy's wound had said it all. But the defense brought an expert to court and a surprising theory about something utterly ordinary: hair. The trial began on February 2023. It became the most publicized case in Westfield's history. Brian Fanion faced a sentence of life in prison. The prosecution laid out his motive, that Brian had grown to despise the marriage, but couldn't divorce, because divorce would destroy his perfect image in the community, and it would force him to hand over half of his pension to his wife. The prosecutor summed up that mindset in one cold line. To Brian, divorce was public, something everyone would know, but in his mind, a murder didn't have to be. But the defense didn't back down. They brought in a crime scene analyst who offered a different theory. According to this expert, the reason there was no gunshot residue was not distance. It was that Amy's thick hair had acted as a filter, blocking the particles before they could reach her skin. To prove it, he even fired test shots through a bundle of hair. Amy's own son also testified for the defense. He said that he could picture his mother in a fit of anger, impulsively grabbing the gun. Now, here it must be said fairly, this was the defense's argument, and throughout, Brian Fanion always maintained that he was innocent. A trial is not a place where absolute truth is found. It is a place where 12 people must decide together which version is the most believable, based on what can be proven. That burden is enormous. After more than 3 weeks of trial, dozens of witnesses, and 2 opposing truths, the fate of Brian Fanion was placed in the jury's hands. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned, and their verdict closed a question that had lasted nearly 5 years. On March 22, 2023, the jury found Brian Fanion guilty, and not of second-degree murder, but of first-degree, meaning they believed he had planned with intent to kill his own wife. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole that very same day. But the most haunting moment was not the sentence. It was the reaction in the courtroom. When the verdict was read, Brian's family, and even those of Amy's relatives who had believed in him, collapsed in sobs. They had truly believed right to the very end that he was innocent. It must be added, for accuracy, Brian Fanion still maintains his innocence, and his conviction is currently under appeal. In America, that's the legal right of every defendant. What we have told is the conclusion of the jury after weighing all of the evidence. The prosecutor, after winning the case, said something that lingers, that this was never a victory, that Amy should still be here, with her children and her grandchildren, because in the end, even when justice is served, it cannot bring back that woman of light. Don't let the name of the convicted man be what you remember most about this story. Remember Amy Fanion, a mother, a wife, a woman who her whole community described with a single word: light. This story leaves behind a chilling truth that sometimes the most dangerous person isn't a stranger in the dark. It's the one who sits at the dinner table with you every day. The one whom the whole world, even your own family, believes is perfect. So what do you think about this case? About a family so deceived that they came to defend the accused? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you think Amy's story deserves to be remembered, leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next story.